One of the most complex processes happening in Latin America in the last few years is Chile's attempt to write a new constitution. But a lot of things happened between 2019 and 2023 regarding not just the process, but the Chilean society as a whole. And this is what we're going to talk about today. Hello, everybody, and welcome to LATAM This Week. My name is Lucas Berti. I'm a Latin American reporter. And with me today, I have Ignacio Portes, the brilliant mind behind all the edits happening here in the Latin American sector at the Brazilian Report. What's up, Nacho?
Hey, Lucas. Good to talk to you.
Yeah, it's good to talk to you too. So, Nacho, one thing that is happening in Latin America right now, in addition to a lot of things happening in 20 different countries, is Chile's challenging process to write a new constitution. And first, let's go back a little, some years, just to talk to everybody about what is happening in Chile right now. Because in 2019, Chile was gobbled by national-wide protests that started to question some things inside Chilean society, especially things concerning socioeconomic disparities that put people like poor people like very far from people who had like some kind of different level inside Chilean society. And picked by that sentiment at that time, Chileans thought it was the time to write a new constitution because the constitutions they have right now was written during the military dictatorship under General Augusto Pinochet during 17 years back in the last century. But what started as a very progressivist sentiment and idea to change the constitution with a lot of power in the hands of the left and left-wing groups in Chile later was rejected by Chileans. And 3 years later, now the commission that is responsible for taking care of that issue, if it was a more left-leaning one at the beginning, now is in the hands of not just the conservative Chilean groups, but the far-right Chilean groups. So I think the basic question here is what happened in Chile during these 3 years?
Well, a lot happened, as you can see. This story, as you said, you could put the start of it right before the pandemic with these massive street protests that we saw in Chile streets. It started as a small student demonstration against subway fares. They wanted cheaper public transport, and they started jumping the turnstiles to travel for free. But this started escalating into more complex demands. We had seen protests before in Chile. They were about lack of opportunities, education, public health, and so on. And this time the protests caught fire. Sometimes there's enough dry wood in society so that protests catch fire beyond a small group of activists, and they started catching on in all of the lower class, in all of the middle class. And by the start of the pandemic, Chile was completely the streets of Chile were full of millions of people. Santiago de Chile had a couple million people in the streets in a few days, in more than one day. I mean, just demanding a complete rethinking of Chilean society, a society that was seen for many years as successful. It had GDP growth, it had political stability, but there was this idea that there were many things excluded from this agenda. Equality above all, and progressive causes such as women's rights. Chile has a very restrictive laws in terms of abortion. They wanted equal representation. They wanted to think about the indigenous question in Chile, the rights of the Mapuche groups in the south. They wanted to have generally a more liberal and progressive and redistributive economically constitution. First it wasn't the constitution, it was just a general demand. And then it turned into a constitutional demand when Gabriel Boric, who wasn't president at the time, he proposed to, he gave like a political exit for this protest. Okay, let's channel this to a constitutional reform, and let's give this some political shape and create a new order, let's say. And so they kind of agreed with Piñera, who was the right-wing president, let's say center-right, very business-oriented person, very conservative person. but not far right maybe. They agreed to, okay, let's discuss a new constitution and let's try to create some peace, because the streets were chaotic, there was police violence, it was impossible to contain. So during the pandemic, protests cooled down, partly thanks to the pandemic, but also partly thanks to this political option that the politicians offered. They said, okay, let's vote for representatives and let's elect an assembly to write a new constitution, to change this Pinochet-era constitution that so many people think to want to change. And they elected an assembly. They wrote a constitutional draft, but something happened, right? And the assembly that proposed very progressive changes was defeated strongly in the polls when they finalized the draft. They wrote a full constitution, a very long, detailed constitution with a lot of social rights, but it lost very strongly, 62 to 38 in the so-called exit referendum, which is when the constitution is ready, people read it and go for the polls and vote for it, and they lost. So yes, something changed in the middle, and really, you could mention a lot of factors. One was that President Boric turned into a president, and people started disliking what he did in government. And there also were some doubts about what the assembly was doing. People started perceiving it as too radical. Maybe we wanted more equality, but maybe they're taking it too far. And things like let's consider Chile a state which has many nations inside it, and not just Chileans, but also the indigenous nations are different nations too, which will have their own courts. And maybe there won't be the police won't have so many options to contain chaos in the streets. And all this idea started to create some unease among let's say, the average voter. And although the activists were still very interested in sanctioning a progressive constitution, these sensation of insecurity and of growing uncertainty about what was going on and what was going to happen in the future got very well. The far right took advantage of that, saying, no, we are breaking the basic things of society. We need a strong police. We need a strong borders. We need just one Chilean nation with only Chileans and not indigenous people are Chileans if they want, and if they not, well, we'll throw the police at them. And we need to control unrest in the streets. The protest got a bit too violent. There were incidents. People started getting tired of seeing the streets full of people. The collateral damage to shops, to someone throws a Molotov bomb here and there, and people in Santiago start saying, okay, what is this? And that's how things happen. Sometimes there's a lot of left-wing initiative, and an action generates a reaction, right? And now we are at the time of reaction. There's the idea that, okay, maybe things were going too far, and now they are swinging to the other extreme, as we saw in the last election a couple of weeks ago, when the right got a very strong victory.
Yeah, that's very interesting, Nacho. And one thing that's caught our attention when we are talking about Chile is, well, the first commission responsible for writing a draft of the constitution was the power was so in the hands of the left that the left wing in Chile didn't even have to negotiate to propose some things. But we have the first draft was rejected, and now Chileans this year voted to compose a new and a smaller commission to propose the second attempt of constitution, and things are very different now. But you have some numbers to give as an example of how much power the left lost during that period.
Yes, the Constituent Assembly was the name of the first group that had to draft a constitution in the first election. Only the right wing, if you combine the center right, the group of Piñera and their allies, 3 or 4 center right parties, with the far right, which basically didn't even exist, it was just 1 or 2 representatives. If you combine them, they had 38 or 39, depends on which parties you count in or not, votes out of 154. So that's roughly 25% of the Constituent Assembly was composed of people from the center right to the right. and that basically didn't even give them veto power to stop any initiatives from the left. Now it completely swung around, and in this election a couple of weeks ago, the center right and right got 34 out of 51 representatives. That's 66.6%. That gives them enough. That gives them 2/3 to vote for any provisions. They can basically write the constitution they want. In the first election, they gave them complete control to the left and center. If they banded together, they could write any constitution they want. And now the right, if they agree to a text, the left cannot do anything but accept what the right elects for the new constitution. The only option will be that people could reject it, right? If the 2/3 of representatives that the center right has in this new Constituent Council, as it is called now, if they write a constitution that is maybe too right-wing, maybe they will find resistance at the polls, because they have this exit referendum, right? But when the representatives stop writing the constitution and they have their final draft, it goes to the general public to vote again to see if they like what the representatives wrote down. And this will be a big question for CAST and for the center right, what they do. If they try to go full attack mode and let's write the same Pinochet constitution once again, and we have the votes, let's see if we win and go for everything. Or if they say, okay, we have an opportunity here to once and for all stop the process, finalize this process of reforming the constitution and write something that is conservative and prudent, without many of the things we feared from the first assembly, without any of the like ensuring that the police has strong powers and their property rights are very secure, and that any nationalizations which should be properly compensated at market value, and all of the things that scared them in the first constitution. Make sure that none of those things are included, but let's make it centrist, right? Let's ensure that we have broad appeal to people who would usually vote for a Christian Democrat party, all of these centrist parties, and let's make sure we get 50% of the votes to win the referendum and have a solid victory and end this thing. But it will depend on what CAST decides. CAST really has the upper hand right now, because out of those representatives, most of them are now from the far right, really, from this Republicanos party that used to have only 1 or 2 representatives. Now they have the biggest caucus, the biggest group in this council will be the far right. And if they combine with the center right, they can do what they want. It will be up to the people to see if they like it or not. But it's like a mirror process, really. Even Boric said immediately after the result, you are in the same position that we were. We made a mistake, Boric said in the day after the second election. We maybe have been too radical and scared people off, and we couldn't do what we wanted. Don't make the same mistake we did and appeal to the centrists, and let's make a reasonable constitution. So it's interesting, because the assembly will start sessioning, the council, as it's called right now, will start sessioning next week. So we will start to see what strategy CAST and company choose, right? If they go full on attack, or if they try to appeal to the center to just win.
No, perfect. That's a really tricky question, because I was reading one of your live blogs here, seeing that people seems to still opposed to the new constitution. But before going into those details, I want to before talking about that, to talk a little bit about the engine behind everything that is happening here, to talk about the Brazilian Report. I would like to remember you guys that the Brazilian Report is fully funded by subscriptions, and I recommend you guys to subscribe to the Brazilian Report to receive our daily newsletters, the weekly newsletter me and Nacho we do every week about everything happening in Latin America, Latin weekly. And also, if you don't have enough to support our journalism right now, you can go to Buy Me a Coffee /Brazilian Report and fill the coffee mugs of our journalists. It will be a huge help for us to keep doing our independent journalism. But Nacho, let's go back to your live blog here. And I'm reading something you recently posted about the fact that the majority of Chileans is still opposed to a new constitution. But I want to get inside one specific topic, which is Chile was not as violent as it is right now. And this is a very important flag for any right-wing group across Latin America. So what can we say about that?
Yeah, and crime. This is one of the other things that changed in this last few months, let's say, is that crime became the number one topic, and the right always wins when crime is the discussion. It's generally a topic that the left doesn't always have a good answer to it. They have like long-term ideas, like let's try to make sure that poor people have opportunities, but that's a long-term thing. When people are in this, when there's robberies and homicides, and there's, as in seems to be the case in Chile, there's more organized crime, right? And with like a bit more the headlines are more impressive, right? Like a commando group assaulted a cargo train, or people with big assault rifles took over this place or that, and people say, "Oh, what? Suddenly are we Mexico? What is going on?" And so we saw a few headlines like that of like organized crime doing big heists in Chile. And crime has gone up. Sometimes the right exaggerates this thing. A few headlines can scare people, but if you actually look at numbers that are hard to fake, like homicide rates and so on, they have gone up
as well.
Yeah. And so it's not just a phenomenon. Crime is a big thing in Latin America. For people who watch us from outside the continent, Latin America is one of them. It's the most unsafe continent in terms of common crime, not of wars. There's no wars really. A couple of narco wars maybe, but full war is rare. But what's common is everyday violence. You get robbed in the corner. There's a kidnapping. And Chile felt a little bit safe from that. Chile, Uruguay. We did a story not so long ago about how crime is suddenly a topic in Chile, Uruguay, Costa Rica, places that were more or less seen as a bit quote unquote European but peaceful, let's say, that they didn't have a lot of conflict and didn't have a lot of violence. But suddenly we're starting to see that in Chile, and the right has taken advantage. There was a nice investigation about why people voted for Republicanos, and the number one reason seems to be they associate the Republicanos brand with fighting crime. They made a great the people per se, except caste, they are not very well known. The representatives that they chose for, people don't know them really. But what they managed to do was, you see this crime headline, well, the Republicanos party does not want this to happen. We don't want, we won't accept organized drug bans terrorizing the country. And we will be tough on crime, and this government is weak on crime, and so on. They just hammered this topic one again and again and again, and it went perfect with what's happening, which is a rise in crime. And this combined with the rise in street protests, it gives the idea that the basic order of Chile that Chile has had for a few decades is at risk, and that puts people in a conservative mode. And Boric is now starting to understand, I think, that he has to make crime a part of his agenda. He just earlier today spoke in his what we would call the State of the Union address in Chile, and he made sure to recall that they have now approved a few initiatives to combat crime, that crime is he said number one priority, crime. What left government says that? It doesn't really happen, but the agenda forced him to, right? He just was getting crushed so strongly in not only in one election, but in two elections, in the exit referendum, and now in this election to choose new representatives for the second constitutional attempt. So he started to address these topics, and he's as a result of this, trying to move to the center, basically, to say, okay, the issues that my adversaries talk about all the time, they have some valid points. We're going to address them. We're not going to stop being what we are. Like we're still care. He talked in today about the importance of new welfare protections, of caring for newborn for children, pensions, etc., minimum wage that he sanctioned recently, a tax reform and so on, which are more typical stories that the left usually puts first, right? But I think he noticed that crime and migration are two topics that he has to start talking about in order to counteract what the right is doing so successfully right now.
Yeah, and the future is challenging for Boric because sometimes when a leader goes too much to the center, he sometimes pisses off both the right and the left.
Yeah.
And that's why the people are so much disapproving of the tenure of Boric right now. But there's certainly things that we're going to see and cover here at the Brazilian Report in the coming months, in the coming times, because as we said, the commission that is now responsible for writing the second draft has 5 months to do that. So by the end of the year, we are going to have some new facts happening. And of course, our readers, people like who watch us here at Lives, if we'll certainly see what is happening in Chile and across Latin America. So thank you everybody for watching us today, and keep looking at the Brazilian Report for everything happening in Latin America in the coming times, not just in Chile, but across the continent. I also thank Ignacio Portes, Nacho, our friend from Buenos Aires, and we will be back in a few times to talk a little bit more about Latin America.